Welcome back, sports fans, and specifically the race fans. If you're tuning in for some review-style podcast, this is the series. Welcome to the Crank Brothers Race Review series, where I will, and with selected co-hosts, break down each and every round of the World Cup. Man, what a race it was in Poland, a new venue. That's always exciting. Now, we know they're synonymous with downhill racing, and when you have a guy like Ronan Dunn in the shoe and the pedal, and he goes on to win, you know you're going to get something really special, and he did. He delivered a shoey on the podium. But there's other riders, Lucas Shaw back on form, Camille Belange back in the mix as well, Troy Brosnan looking to sort of carry on the momentum from Fort William. He didn't do so. Benoit Collange was solid as well. But yeah, thanks to them for always just supporting the podcast, and I've got none other than an ambassador for them as well, and a man wearing a few more hats. Alan Milway, you heard from him in the pre-race sort of, what do we do? The preview with Sven and Alan. Then I've had Sven on, so I thought it fitting to get Alan. Yeah, new venue. Track looked awesome from what I can see. The riders seem to be buzzing. Yeah. Well, how was it for you guys?
Yeah, it was great to go somewhere new. Over the course of these World Cup seasons, we often go back to the same venues and often back to the same tracks. So to turn up somewhere completely new, I honestly didn't know what to expect from Poland at all. It was really exciting to be, a completely different country I've never been to. And like you said, let's start with the track, because there was I don't know if you saw the helmet cam that was sort of leaked out a little early. We were all looking at this helmet cam and thought, this is just going to be like a bike park with loads of jumps. But that couldn't have been further from the truth. The GoPro just flattened it all out, and you couldn't see all the loam and the natural stuff. So it was a fantastic track, and I think that always sets the scene, doesn't it? Because the riders are excited to ride something like that.
Yeah, and then it also brings you guys as like team support, and all the line spotters, and the schedule's a little bit more condensed. Plus there was weather, so that was exciting for us at home. But yeah, it's obviously like all hands on deck, I think, at a new venue, especially like a tight track like that. It's going to be around 3 minutes. You can't really afford mistakes. Got to get up to speed quickly. So it's pretty paramount to have that sort of support. And you could see the riders with good attitudes just getting on with it, and maybe some like Ronan, maybe not looking into too many lines and just getting on with it and seeing how fast he can ride the main line or whatever lines he ended up on.
This is the ultimate debate that we always have. I heard that Canyon had 7 people on the track this weekend for track support. I don't know if I'm blowing that cover by saying that, but yeah. So they were obviously probably, every single section looking at everything in minute detail. I was on the track. Fridays are crazy days. If my wife thinks I'm going to play with bikes and having a good time, Friday's not the day for her to say that, because it's like early start, B practice starts, you're up the hill. There's no gap between A and B practice now. So it's really hard to basically find a break to come down and get some food. So you're sort of pretty much up on the track until 4:30 in the afternoon. And as you're going through that, the track's developing. So you have to be mindful not to just throw a load of input into someone's brain, because the track's changing, the lines are coming out. There's an inside line that we might have seen in practice. Is it going to work? Is this ruck going to get blown? And the racers are very astute. They know that there might be a good line to start with, but it won't last. So it's always interesting working with them. But I do think there were some lines to be had up there. And the track did change. What was a shame was, because it was a new venue, there were some things that were foreseen. We did foresee a few things on track walk, and unfortunately, no one listened to our advice early enough. So they sort of came back to bite people, and that was a little frustrating, because time training, they cut out one of the bridges for quite a chunk of time training because the chicken wire came off. But that was highlighted track walk. We just said there's not enough chicken wire on there. It's going to come off. It's going to get scary in the wet. So these are the things that will get ironed out. The bugs will get ironed out. But different people and different approaches, isn't it?
Yeah, most certainly. And you could go on for days whether you just get on with it and you just get your flow and do laps, and then some other experienced guys might do a bit more watching, I would presume, getting a lot of input, thinking what's going to break down, what's going to not. And that's where that experience plays off. But it's such an awesome time of the sport. You've almost got this young crop that is just riding on heart and aggression. And then you've got, obviously, experienced someone like Loic, really methodical. But even he got caught out with the ever-changing conditions. So that was like another storyline, is when to attack, how hard to attack, tire choice. Like, for a new venue, it certainly delivered, as close to it could. Yeah, there's obviously these like little things you say, but I think as a new venue, for how it looked like on TV, from what the riders were talking about it, everyone's so jazzed,
Oh yeah, we were really excited to ride it, and the rain I think helped, because the dirt was a little bit like léger dirt in the woods, or Val de Sol sort of moon dust. It was really, really fine, and because it had been so dry before, it looked like nothing would pack, so you wouldn't get a nice rut. It would just get completely blown apart. But when the rain came down, it allowed you to cut through and actually find a rut, and the track developed really well because of it. It's quite interesting to see how much a track breaks down with these riders going flat out, and the aggression and the speed at which everyone's going is phenomenal. I spoke to quite a few riders who didn't make it through, whether it be top 60 or in the semi-top 30, and I was asking them, well, what happened with your run? And they said it was fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And it's almost, if you're going nice and steady and you have a nice clean run, it's simply not fast enough. And that is how you approach that without going over the edge, because you see what happens when you go over the edge. You end up with a big crash. And Greg Williamson, I think, was lucky to be protected to go through to the final after his crash, but he showed sort of where the protection comes into play, because he ended up 7th, and that was really well deserved. But other riders who did crash and didn't make it through, or went steady, trying to make sure they don't crash, and all of a sudden you're just out the back door. So the sport's really got to a level now with these young riders coming through and pushing. But then you say young riders, and you've got Loic is up there, Benoit's up there, Amory back on the podium, Luke has been here for a while. So there's still the wily old dogs who know to play the long game. And do you think that it's just their pace, or do you think that they're able to find the line, or how do you think they're able to stay there so long when you see Ronan he literally said he was either going to win or end up in an ambulance. So it's so different.
Well,
so different.
I've got a few bullet points that I wouldn't want to get through an awesome conversation and not touch on them. And you've opened up a can of worms. There's a few there, but to that point, where is the sport? If you've got a youngster, is he just saying it? But it seems like it's what he believes. He says, I saw the pace, I saw the times, I don't normally look at them, and I was either going home in a helicopter, and I quote this, or I was going to win. Now, I haven't heard that a lot before. I've heard, I was really going to throw caution to the wind, and I knew I had to attack, and all these different things that the riders psych themselves up with. And it has moved on a little bit. And that's insane. If you've got a rider with that much raw speed and willing to throw that sort of aggression at a race run, I mean, I don't think Loic's saying I'm going to go home in a helicopter. He's saying, okay, I'm going to go 100%, and he's going to choose where to do that. So that's I literally wrote that down, and I was like, I've never heard that before.
No, he had real firm belief in himself, Ronan, and it was his sort of track as well. It was very fast, and there were these long corners. There were quite a few long corners on that track, and that was, I don't know whether that necessarily helps one rider over another, but if you can carry speed into them and carry speed through them, that there were some key corners on the track where it all went across a long piste. There was 2 sections where there was a technical corner and then quite a long flat piste. Then it went back into the woods and had the same again. And you just knew that if there was a mistake on that corner, all your pace would have been gone. And in the women's race, Miriam crashed there and Gracie crashed there in the same section in this sort of one small wood section. And there was just no coming back from that. And it's a real shame when you see something like that, but also you can see the potential of these riders that are pushing on, because when you sort of see an over the bars crash, but their time was the same time as qualifying, you're like, whoa, they found more time. They found probably 10 seconds. You know, if you're tangled up in your bike upside down, there's probably 10 seconds there. So, yeah.
Yeah, that seemed one of the keys, right? So watching Dunn's GoPro run was just fascinating. And there's a few sections, and he mentioned it, like he would want to touch the brakes there, but decided not to. So your instincts are telling you, okay, a little brake tap. And I mean, there's a few trees, like you say, there's these long, fast corners, and the exit has a padded tree. I mean, if you get that wrong, you're going to want to naturally brake or kind of be like, okay, I've got enough exit speed here. But to win these days, he's saying, okay, normally I have to brake, but today I'm just not going to brake and see where it gets me. And that's sort of a key, because he's carrying a lot of exit speed. And he was obviously incredible at carrying speed at the right time into those pedaly sections. And he swore at himself in the pedaling section. He's like, F, pedal. You know, he's actually telling himself, like he dug deep in that run. And I think you asked the question, what are these old dogs doing? I mean, they clearly have as much pace. But to do it where you have to get to this level of, you know, taking the brain out and just saying, well, I'm not braking, that's really impressive. But I think it shows to their experience and their just speed. Loic has the speed, clearly. And he's just such a methodical racer. He's going to brake at the exact perfect time to get the exit speed. You know, he had a really good run down the bottom. And that's where someone like, you know, which we'll get to, is, you know, Lachlan had the fastest third split, or till the third split, right? And he came undone in what you would argue is a really simple section. And to me, that's a little bit of inexperience. And the reason I say that is he was offline there, and that's where you should be so focused to be on the right line. And there, even if you touch the brakes a bit more, there's such a crucial section coming up. But he'd come in so hot, he was a little bit inside coming in, and then he ran it wide and he lost the front. So that's like the difference between experience and inexperience in my mind.
Yeah.
But on that subject, for someone like that to go quali well, back it up in semis, and then in the final, he was not going to just get down and get a top 10 or, you know, I'm really, really impressed that a guy like that with that much pressure said, you know what, caution to the wind, I'm going out. Check it. He rode so committed. And I think that's the most impressive thing, and he should take away from this. It's not a crash in a final. It's like he wanted it, and he tried. He didn't get tight. He didn't, like, you know, have a good run and go, oh, I rode a bit tight and I was obviously nervous and I got 13th, you know?
Yeah, he was one of the standout riders of the weekend, and such an exciting rider. And he's changed a lot since last year. He's really matured in his approach, and he's really sort of zoned in and being more methodical. The questions he comes out with are so different from last year. So you can see how he's reflecting on himself, on improving, and having a bit more self-confidence. He's really good friends with Ollie Davis. They're traveling to Leogang and Schladming in a van together and hanging out for the next couple of weeks. And they were in Dovey last week. I saw those guys last week in Dovey, and they're having a great time riding their bikes. And if you've got a friend that has just got signed to the syndicate, is riding at the top of their game, and you're his buddy and you ride on his back wheel all day long, that's going to breed a certain amount of confidence, knowing if I just ride like myself, I'll be fine. And what really excited me from being in that finish area, watching his run especially play out, was he crossed the line and he had a smile on his face. He was like, I can do this. And it wasn't a case of, just as you referred to really earlier, not being able to deliver on the day in terms of clamming up, riding tight, you know, sort of notching out a corner. He rode with flair. And the section where he crashed, everyone was saying it felt like they were riding a tightrope to get onto those bridges. They were really narrow, and just to be that little bit offline and coming in with a bit more speed than he probably has done just made the difference, and he just went down. But I'd say that was one of the key corners. In the semi-final, you saw Dakota lose a load of time, and he tried to cut that corner tight, but he didn't, the right-hander onto the sort of completely flat straight. But there was a wider line that had opened up, and you can almost hop over these two tree roots and give you a bit of a backside. And that's where maybe you have to maybe trackside support helps, those people, because I don't know whether he'd seen that or he made a change because of it. But these little things, when you're on the ground watching rider after rider, that little bit of entry speed onto a very fast flat section, it's probably half a bike length. And nowadays, that's what wins or loses the race.
Yeah, key point is, I mean, those quali times, I think it was quali times I looked at, and I said, I'm going to start digging into some stats. So I started a little spreadsheet looking back. I want to go back a little bit. Like, I haven't seen the top 60 or top 30 separated by that few of a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, what? You're like 3 and a bit seconds back and you're out the top 30 or whatever the number was, I think. And if it was 6 seconds back to the top 60 or something so small, I was like, it wasn't many years ago that there was sort of sometimes 2 to 3 seconds on the podium. And then, obviously the top 10 super tight. And then we'd have these time gaps, even on these short tracks. So yeah, super impressive. We speak about it ad nauseum that the depth is there, the youngsters coming up. Like you say, so Laughlin's buddy Ollie's on a syndicate, so now he's more hungry. He's like, okay, but hang on, I feel like I'm the same rider. Now I've got something to prove, or okay, let me just go out there and swing for the fences here. So yeah, so super impressive. But that's why I think we're seeing more mistakes and more crashes in these finals from, say, only 30 guys on the broadcast, 10 in the women. We didn't see as many issues down the final few stretch because guys knew exactly what to do and they'd got their pace. Now it's like, okay, even the experienced guys, Loris Vergier, for that matter, is pushing so hard that he almost had like a huge crash.
Yeah.
It would have been horrible if he came off the bike where he did. And to me, it's racing incidents, but maybe he's just subconsciously having to push the envelope that little bit more with these 3 timed runs and just knowing that Oaks are willing to be in helicopters after a race. So that was that's kind of what stood out to me, is times are crazy, crazy tight. And I'm sure over the next few years, we could get some data to sort of prove that. And then because of that, man, guys are pushing. And more mistakes happen in the race runs.
Yeah, something that I've thought about a bit more over this season, and especially after this weekend, is with everything being so tight, I do think there's something to be said about bike setup, because I've talked to Greg quite a lot about this. He talks about a fast bike and a slow bike. And you sort of have a slower bike that is way more forgiving, and you're the one that's inputting the speed into that bike. And then you've got the opposite, where you've got a fast bike that wants to jump out of corners, accelerating everywhere, much faster in terms of rebound, but it's a lot more dangerous. If something goes wrong, you're getting bounced off that bike. And when you see Loic's bike from a few years ago, that was definitely a fast bike. And when things went wrong, it sort of pogo sticked him off. I think his bike has been a little bit more refined again. And funnily enough, after semis, I wanted to go up and see how the track was developing. We hadn't, from Norco's point of view, it hadn't been a good day. And I'll touch on that in a minute because there's some interesting insights, I think, from that. But I wanted to see the track, and Loic was on track. And I said, I tell you what, your bike is working bloody well. And he sort of smiled at me and he goes, you just have to work harder, Alan. You just have to work harder. And it was said in such a nice way. I was like, I'm glad you're here. You know what I mean? I need people like you here because it keeps us really working hard. And because he's putting that effort into the bike, he's putting the effort into himself. And I think there's a fine line to be said, not only on the rider, but also on that bike setup. Because if you get a bike setup wrong, Gracie's bike wasn't great in Fort William for the rocks. It was too slow. And it just packs down rock after rock after rock. And all of a sudden you're feeling every bump and you're not carrying any momentum. And the bike sort of got its brake on almost. But you go the other way and you have a really fast bike and you've got a risk of crashing. So that side of things is always something that I find fascinating. And when Greg went up for his run, he felt that something wasn't right on the rear end, on the shock. It just wasn't as he wanted it as he was going to the lift. And he had to sort of ride within it. And they dynoed it afterwards and the shock had basically blown. And that's really frustrating because he'd come down with a run that was safe and smooth and thought would is that going to be enough? But it obviously just wasn't anywhere near, because it was too safe and smooth, and he couldn't push on because the bike wasn't sort of safe to do so. So I do think that now we're getting to that point where everything has to be refined. I don't think there's necessarily a good bike or a bad bike, but I do think there's a good setup and a bad setup.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So where do you think Loic's gone? He's found the happy medium, because he did say he's happy with his setup, right? So you think he's found this happy medium where he's somehow got some comfort, but it's fast enough that he's risking some sort of crashes here and there.
Yeah, I think when you watch his bike after the apex of a corner, it's just pulling. It's like I'm riding a 450 and it's just wanting to jump forward. And that's just my observation. And when you put it next to a bike that's not working quite so well, you can see that difference. But maybe he's managed to get it so that it doesn't quite fully extend and bounce him, maybe risk a bigger crash. He's got a super wily, his old mechanic, Jack, has been around for a long time. I think he was Celine Gross's mechanic from back in the day. He worked with Danny on Lapierre. He's been around for a long time. They've got good support on that team for bikes, and teams are definitely stepping up. But when you take it down a couple of levels in terms of team support, when you look at Danny's setup, for example, Danny isn't the greatest at setting up the bike. And I'll say this to Danny. Danny won't, he won't be annoyed at me saying this, I don't think. He'll ride probably quite a slow and safe bike. It's probably quite controlled, and Danny's the one putting in the speed. But at this level, when Danny says the run wasn't too bad, it was okay, but he's not where he wants to be. I honestly think that if you were to really refine a bike setup, it might give you, if you were testing against the clock, if that gives you 2 seconds on a track, that's light years ahead. 3:01, and you're in the top 15 with 3 seconds. So I think this stuff really has to be considered. It's a really holistic approach. Are you strong enough to hold on to it? Are you fit enough to ride all the way down and sprint at the bottom? Is your bike set up properly? Yeah, it all comes into play, doesn't it?
No, it definitely does. It's always been like an all-round thing. The challenge I'm seeing is people seeing Loic do so well. But you got someone like Ronan. Look, he's got, I think I missed it, but he's Mark Morrison on his bike. Or at least he's in the
Mark's.
in the
I don't know if Mark's
team,
on his
right?
bike, but yeah, Mark's in the pits. Yeah, Mark's.
So there's a lot of experience there. Definitely, I'm not saying the bike's not set up fine, but I feel like he's racing even a suboptimal bike setup, and the riding's doing the talking. So like I think you can also fall victim to like looking over the tent and going, okay, they've got this, they're doing this. So it's such a fine line to help the riders realize, like, hey, the riding does still do the talking. Maybe your bike's not set up perfect. Obviously, you want a safe bike and something like that. You don't want to just go for speed and it's like chaotic to ride. And it's so stiff and tires are super firm. Yes, you can build a super fast one-run bike, but it's not sustainable. But what I'm getting at is such a tough position to be at, because this is like the season of tech, where the tech people have been working on now coming sort of to the front of the race series, like the electronic suspension, this. And it must be tough. Someone like Danny, maybe, okay, I don't quite have this factory support. Like, how do I compete? That's like such a fine line, because I still think like, the riding clearly can do the talking. Like Lachlan definitely didn't have all the support as a top rider, and he's showing it in the split.
This is it. And if someone gave you budget, someone said, right, Andrew, I've got some extra budget for you. You've come to the race. You've got no one up on track to help you. You've got your mechanic, but you've got no suspension tech. Where'd you put your money? Is it better to have someone on track filming and feeding back to you and say, hey, man, you're on the wrong line here. You're wasting 3 runs. You need to change. Or look at your track speed versus someone else. You're absolutely brilliant. Don't try and overcook this section. You're just fine. Is that more beneficial from a coaching angle than having some wizard on the data logger set your bike up and go, well, the bike's fine, mate, and you're going, well, what am I doing wrong? It does come back down to the riding, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's such a fine line. I was going to say, unfortunately, it depends on the rider. If they need some confirmation online so that they stop doubting, or do they need some confirmation on the bike to stop doubting?
Yeah.
It's such a fine line. And, we had races where I'd always want our support crew there, but Danny and I still did well despite them not being there. So, you still have to build your own sort of self-confidence. You have to build your own process and all those sort of things. And I think when you're feeling good and you're confident, you're probably relying less on the guys, even though they're there. It's like, yep, thanks, cool. Right. You confirmed what I was already going to do. You confirmed how I'm thinking. So that's pretty damn interesting. Dak, we've got a feel for Dak. Not easy to win races, right? Like, you don't always have those opportunities. Now, the way he's gone about it is, building through the weekend and then qualifying fastest in semi. Now you got to do it again. So the race format almost comes to bite him in the arse. And I'll take it as a racing incident. My brother's going, are we allowed to ask the question, like, he pushed the front? Are we allowed to ask, did he have enough weight because of these high bars? And the internet might go off on that. I think it was just a racing incident, and that was one of the slickest parts of the track. Now, in hindsight, you can say, why is he not going outside? Why is he not doing this? But I would never go that far. Like, I just think, that line he chose to do, he has to cross the racing track, and that could be where the water runs down the hill. And it was just basically you're asking someone to, like, cross-run over where everyone else rides. So it was always going to be a dangerous line to do at speed.
Yeah, so Mondraker were pitted opposite us, and obviously I worked with Dak, so it was, easy to catch up with him after the race about this. And he was reflecting on it and wondering whether he should have changed something or what had happened. And he'd ridden that line all weekend. So all race he'd been on that same line, and he felt as though the track everywhere else was drying. He'd watched the juniors and he'd seen the wet, and he was concerned on certain sections because of the rain. Because for the junior race in the morning, it absolutely poured with rain. But then it just dried and dried and dried. So, coming last man down the hill, there was no danger of it really being wet at all. But that was probably the only damp patch on the track. And before he could reflect on whether it would have enough grip to do what he wanted to do, he was upside down. And he's absolutely kicking himself. He's furious at himself. And I just think it's a racing incident. I don't think you need to look into it any more than that. I'd say I'd look to that inside versus outside, and the inside is shorter. And if you could really commit to it, it was coming out just a hair's breadth ahead, I thought. And because the end of the outside berm wasn't really very supportive, and it could sort of push you. So there was certainly something to be looked at in that corner. But yeah, I just think it's one of those situations. And if you turn it into something a little bit more and you start asking yourself, should I have had someone go down the track and look at that corner, see if it's wet? I don't know if that helps. If someone's taken a photo and sent it up to you and you're warming up on your trainer at the top and they say, oh mate, there's a bit of mud here, there's a bit of, there's a shiny root. I find that very, very difficult to feed back to an elite athlete, that sort of information, because they're so much better than anyone else on the planet at riding this stuff. You have to be very confident if you're going to ask them to slow down or change their line, because if you were to break down the holes and the deterioration on this track and you were to look at it, you'd be petrified they were going to crash every single corner or something would jump out at them. So I think there is a balance to be had here, and not overload with worry, really.
No, I agree. That's why I say, like, I text him back and I was like, it's a fair question. That's where you could lead to. You obviously want to find reasons for it happening. But yeah, it's just a pure racing incident. That's a line, like you said, he's been running it all week long. He liked it. And that's what makes him exciting, is he is creative and he does do some different lines.
Yeah. Maybe
he learns from it, or in the future he goes, okay, that's an awesome line to do. But worst case, that line can go really wrong at race pace. But the outside doesn't really go that wrong. You might dab the brakes a bit much or not get the perfect exit speed. You're still in the race. And that's always a fine line with choosing lines. It's like, how much am I going to gain here versus like what what could happen on a consistent basis. So yeah, I feel for him. Like, I think he'll just stay hungry. It's an amazing feat to what he's doing, and to be so good in quali and then win semis, pretty damn awesome. So yeah, that is a tough pill to swallow. Another storyline is Amaury Perron, be fifth back on the podium, second race back after what I think he's kept quiet was a brutal injury to go through, both physically and mentally. And quite hard on himself after Fort William, it sounds. I've got some rider interviews at Sven and Misspent Summers at Providers, which will be later in the podcast. Seemed like even though he's realistic, you've got to, start way down the ladder, and take these steps to get back to where you expect to be. It's just easier said than done, to get 15th and be so many seconds back. You might think, oh, what a tall order. I'm never going to get back on the podium at this rate. And then boom, second race. I think he's probably coming out of here, gaining some of the most momentum out of anyone.
Yeah, it was great to see him back on the podium and great to see him fighting at the very sharp end, and pretty quickly too. Just like you said, 2 races and he's back up to speed, which is probably quite worrying for some of the other racers there, because if he's this good already, and to see, the French flag, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, bloody hell, it's amazing. Whether it's like I think we've talked about before, the collective nature of having very fast people riding together, and I don't know their national series very well and how well they support it, but it's amazing to see that how strong the French are at the moment. And Deprella, I'll have to say, he's done pretty well this weekend, into 14th under the radar. He's sort of coming in under the radar, and I think there's a few grumbles about him still that are going around. I don't think that situation has really been addressed. It's still just this rumor mill of situation, which I don't think helps anyone, if I'm honest, because no one's heard the ins and outs of it, and we don't want it to be gossip, so we don't talk about it. But he's come 14th, which is very impressive, and on a very much privateer program, really.
Yeah, I saw some comments. Is he eligible for the Windmasters privateer project?
Oh dear, yeah, that's a good point. I'd love to see that interview. Go interview him, Win. Let's see what comes out of it. I'll be interested. I'll be the first one to watch that.
No, thanks for bringing that. I agree. We mentioned in Fort William he was qualified 9th and missed out because of the semis. So yeah, I mean, you've got to give people credit for their race results, and 14th this day and age, it's a second or 2 away from like exceptional results. So that's pretty cool. And would you say, even though the course is 3 minutes, but the way they set it up, and Loris Verger was a little bit outspoken about this, the stop and start kind of nature of some of the sections, like it was really physical actually, because you got to slow down and get up to speed and on the pedals. Like they lost, it looked flowy on TV, but you could see the guys like fighting the pedals to get back up to speed. So that added to the physical nature. Like, what did it look like when people were finishing their runs? What was it like with the athletes? Were they saying, shuck, this is quite a physical track?
So I snuck in to right by the podium because I wanted to watch the big screen, and I was where the archway is, where the riders come out. So once the riders finish their race run, they're in that sort of corral. They come out the finish area under that arch, and then they go up onto the podium. So I was standing there. Ronan was on the podium. He'd come through. He'd gone up onto the podium, and he was in all his body armor, and he just wanted to get his body armor off. So he comes down the steps, and he's like, "Alan, can you take this body armor off for me?" And then he looks at me and he's like, "I promise you, I will never, ever miss a sprint session ever again." So you could tell the first thing on his mind is how physical it was. So we had a bit of a laugh about that. And then he just wanted to get out of all his body armor because he was so, it was so hot and physical. And it's really, as you described, the top section of the track it looked a lot of fun to ride, if I'm honest. I think it was a really, really good fun track. It had some nice flow to it. Then you came into a traverse across the piste, into another wood section, and then you had quite a flat straight. They were sort of linking wood sections together, essentially. And then lower down the track, they clearly had this linking section that really wasn't very fun to ride, I don't think, for the riders, because it was flat across some bridges. They were going across a stream. There was a couple of like sort of little ravines they had to cross, and that's why they put all those bridges in. But there was a couple of key corners where if you didn't get them right, you wouldn't carry speed. And then you had to really hit the pedals very, very hard. And not only that, you were then going from bright sunshine into darkness. And you know how hard that is. There was 2 key parts on the track where it went from really bright to really dark. And mere mortals would just touch the brakes and take a dab. But it was building that confidence for the riders that they could look far ahead and pick a point, pick a tree, pick a branch, pick a pad to look at, to know, right, I'm on the right line here. I don't have to flinch at all. And carrying that speed was vital, because the last wood section, I'm glad they did get us to that last wood section, because it was phenomenal. The camera really did flatten it out. It was incredibly steep. I fell flat on my bum trying to film in B practice and slid down that. You know, it was really steep. So it was worth us getting to that point, but I think the riders suffered in a couple of sections to make it happen.
Yeah, and I guess it is a World Cup series, so different styles of track and different fitness and different strengths. You saw some riders that were incredibly strong on the pedal and, you know, kept speed. You saw some riders like Cami, which we'll get to later in the ladies. I think she gave up a little bit of time there, I would say, but she made it up in the woods. So, yeah, I love it. It just looked definitely, I was like, you got this hard sprint as you get out the gate. There wasn't like a big roll in. And you got this intensity, and then you got to traverse. Like your heart rate's just going to be spiked the whole way. And it'd be awesome to show the mere mortals like that data and like how fit you have to be to keep that pace. Like you say, Ronan Dunn's been doing his sprints, and he's certainly not going to maybe sneak off to ride his downhill bike overdoing the rest of them, because he's like, oh, geez, imagine I didn't do those sprints. Like I might not have pipped Loic, because Loic was very strong to the bottom. And that's something you have to do, is even if you have an incredible run, there's a finish line, and you can't sort of save it in the last woods or check up and save these fast runs, especially in this day and age. And Ronan was incredibly good in the last woods, saying, oh, well, the double means my wheels are off the ground. I got less chance to slip. So refreshing way to answer the question of, like, you know, you're one of the few people doing that double in the last woods. But I know the TV doesn't do those sort of lines justice at all.
No, I know, and they see the need for the training. I think that's what to me is quite exciting. From the riders I coach, every one of them has been super motivated after that weekend. Everyone's pretty much going to Schladming this week. They're going there or to Leogang, and there's a big group who've all gone. And I had a long travel day yesterday, just the nature of getting home from Poland. Got home and I got a message off Ronan, and it was a selfie of him and Charlie looking grumpy, and it was like, we're ready for our intervals tomorrow. And you know they know it. We've got to get it done. It's part of the game, and it's once you've had a result that you see the fruits of your labor, you're like, oh, we do need to do this. It's part of what we're doing, and it does allow you to have that focus and that concentration, because sometimes you can underestimate the requirements of incredible levels of fitness, because a mistake happens in a technical section. You think, oh, that's a technical mistake, but often it isn't. Often it's if your heart rate's through the roof at 200 beats a minute and your concentration goes and you can't quite hang on, you make a technical mistake. And I get frustrated. I've made a couple of comments on the Whoop posts where they talk about Loic Bruni at 160 beats a minute, or seeing someone at 145 beats a minute. Now, I don't know Loic's heart. Maybe Loic's heart is the size of a V8 engine, and it probably is, so it doesn't beat as quickly. But I've seen very few people that low in all the testing I've done. And it would be nice to show people that the heart rates and the lactate response, which is sort of an indication of how anaerobic the exercise is, it's so high. And if you were doing this in a rowing boat, or if you were doing it running, or if you're doing it, in like a cross-country skiing, there's not really a technical element to it. The risk involved of hurting yourself if you sort of collapse isn't really there, but you do it when you've then got to go into some rocks at, what was the speed trap, 60k an hour. You don't dare have a problem. So this is what they need to show on the telly, and I'm really passionate about that, because I don't want people to think that it's a sport where you can get by on your wits alone. It used to be, we could say skill won out solely in the early 90s maybe, but people were still fit back then. They're all ex-cross country riders. So everything plays a part, and that's certainly the beauty of it.
Yeah, I mean, in other sports, people, why do they go to the gym? Why do they do this? I said, well, because their mind will be better come 4 hours into a golf round or whatever, for lack of a better term. People say, that's not a sport. Yeah. I'm like, you're missing the point of the training. Yeah. You're missing the point. It's not to hit the ball further. It's not always to sprint harder. It's to get through a weekend, which track walk starts on Thursday. Not to mention if you've traveled in overseas, you've got to recover, track walk, do your practice. Now you got to do quali and semi. Now you got to recover. So that's where the fitness comes in. That's where all your work is, pays off. And then making better decisions under fatigue. And like you say, if you're that little bit fitter, maybe we saw a few people, when you save it on the stem, you're like, okay, so is that a bit of bench press? That's a bit of full body. That's even from doing your intervals. You're like, you've recovered from the sprint and you're good to go. So yeah, I mean, anyone that says downhillers aren't fit is definitely not ridden a bike down the hill at that pace and able to make decisions and handle it. That's pretty damn cool. Speaking of fitness, is he going to be able to bounce back from this party? I mean, how big was Ronan Dunn's party? How big did you allow him to go, or did he allow himself to go? Surely you've got to let this happen.
Yeah, I think they were held up in anti-doping for quite a while because the Mondraker boys, the mechanics were getting way ahead of everyone else at that point, still waiting for their riders to come back. And I think Ronan was shell-shocked. They ended up, unfortunately, I'm in my 40s now. I can't keep up with these young bucks. So I had a nice meal with the Norco crew, and we sort of, things got a little bit crazy because I hadn't realized that the shots that were being passed around were 70% alcohol, which is this way above my pay grade. So I had an early night, but I think that the after party always goes on and people find some trouble. So he's probably quite happy to work it off, but needs to celebrate. I think whichever way you do it, and we're not saying you need to go out and get trousered after a race weekend. But I think what we're saying is you need to appreciate that all of this hard work has provided a good outcome, and however you want to celebrate it, whether it be staying in with your feet up, whether it be going out and celebrating, have a few drinks, that's brilliant, and then you can reset and go again.
No, absolutely. I'm just quickly gathering through the results. Like, we're obviously jumping around. Like, I think there's always many people that deserve notable mentions. Greg Williamson, people say he's a Fort William specialist. Well, that track was far from Fort William.
Yeah.
So he bloody well was almost on the podium, second or two back. Andy Kolb's building slowly. I think Angel's probably like really relieved after that one. I think that's big, and probably Ethan Craig didn't have a great Fort William. So that's pretty awesome to see. And Osen O'Callaghan came down in. Would you say that coming down so early was then maybe a little bit of a disadvantage, because the track must have dried? And you just get that free speed of the dirt. The drier the dirt is till it gets too dry, the tires roll quicker. So he maybe coming down a little bit earlier than others had a slower track within reason. You could argue that.
I'd say that. He was the first one to really make a dent in the times. That was one of the times that really, we were like, wow, here we go. He's really come in. Ethan had been riding really well all weekend, and I'm always astonished. He's a nice lad, and again, he was up on track walk, and I said, this is far cry from QE, Queen Elizabeth Country Park, where he's from, near Petersfield. It's fantastic to see him riding at this level. And like you said with Angel Suarez, big up Frameworks. I've always said on this that I love that project. I've got such a lot of respect for Nico, and I was devastated. When you see a post and someone's been burgled in your home country, and they've been, the guys have ripped him apart in his van apart in Milton Keynes. I was like, oh man, you come to the UK and that's what happens. I was really disappointed for him, but apparently he flew back to the States, got the bikes he needed, came back to Europe, made some adjustments, and for Asa to go 2 for 2 in the juniors, and look, he looks good. That boy looks good.
Yeah, and those conditions weren't easy. It's like raining on and off during the junior race. He didn't have a great quali, but he just looks like he's not really trying. You know, he looks a little Lucas Shaw-like, little Josh Bryson, as we said. Like, is he going that quick? Well, geez, look at the split. He's 2 seconds up, which is impressive because you could be on the ragged edge, which then I don't know if that's sustainable if you're having to always be on the ragged edge to win. You know, if he's being able to ride what seems like within himself, so it seems. You know, it's a cool starting base for him to hopefully even build from there. So, yeah, equally impressive to see him win, them to get bikes back, don't have all this. So speaking of that, they've got support from Fox and stuff like that. They'll have the latest suspension technology, and they've got Fox to support them, but they don't have a million line spotters. They don't have a million people, but they're making it work, you know, and that's pretty cool to see, I must say. And then Heather Wilson also goes back-to-back. Okay, is it a home track advantage? That's cool. You know, she's beaten out the current Aris, the current world champion, who's no slouch getting down a hill. And the junior ladies are deliberate, is one word I would say. It's not just, okay, we're riding down, we're getting knocked off track a bit. We've seen that in the past. Like, they're not quite strong enough, or they're hesitant. Like, they're very deliberate where the bike's going, what they're doing. Like, the skill and the pace is so impressive.
The women's category is, you know, juniors and elites is really playing out as to what we discussed pre-season. The skill level is going up and up, the speed's going up and up at a really fast rate. And when you watch them ride, you know, it's fantastic to watch these girls ride with such flair and control and flow. They're not just sort of hanging on for grim death and getting down the track. And they're clearly starting a lot earlier. They're getting good input a lot earlier, whether that be from a skills side or from a fitness standpoint. And when you watch, you know, Ellie from the Union, another one of the Kiwi girls, she rides so well in practice, and she's not quite put it together in a race run yet. But that's completely normal from a junior side of things. You know, if you're just new to racing, that doesn't matter. That will come. But when you watch them, there's 5 or 6 of them who really do ride incredibly well. And I think that's just fantastic for the sport, because they're going to come through. But then I think there are going to be some changes next year in terms of how the categories and the schedule will play out. But they have to make sure that they expand the elite women's field, because if we're talking about 5 or 6 really exciting junior girls, where have they got to go? There's nowhere for them to go. If there's only 10 going through to the final, they're just going to get snuffed out really in terms of their development. And or they're going to push out other girls who are on the cusp of the top 10 from the elite, who haven't quite found their form. Like, you know, the male versions of Andy Kolb and Benoit Coulange, who took a while to come through and get used to the elite senior categories. And we've got to really protect that. And that certainly is something that's really on my radar. And when I know Rory's a big part of this, you know, looking after downhill and the track, and I saw Rory on the track, and I was like, oh, how's it going? And you could tell he was like, yeah, you know, basically all I hear is the bad stuff. And I just sort of said, you know, unfortunately in your job, it's really bad, because we all should be phoning Rory like today and go, hey, dude, take your right hand and give yourself a pat on the back. Amazing track, amazing racing. We're super, super excited. And maybe we do need to say that a little bit more to these guys at the top, because after a race like this, of course there were problems, but the grand overall feedback it was brilliant. And I worry that, you know what it's like. People only bring up the bad stuff. You know, you only get the phone call and the message when someone's not quite happy. Oh, I've got some feedback for you. And you know what that means. You know, oh, here we go. What have I done wrong? But when someone sends you an email and they go, you know what, Alan, I really appreciate what you've done. And you'll have received them, but you won't have received enough of them. You know, you always feel good, don't you?
Yeah. No, you've hit the nail on the head. And it was a question I had for you is how do you go about it? Or do we just tell, like, maybe there's juniors listening and there's elites that it hasn't quite clicked yet, but the potential is there, not the deluded potential, a deluded version of reality, but some people take longer to develop. The Aces, the Jackson, the Jordan, those are such outliers. The Troy Brosnan from back in the day, the Sam Hill, the Brendan Fairclough, they're all outliers. But look who stood the test of time, as some of these guys that have been around for longer, and some of the juniors are not getting as much experience, so they're not going to be as fast as the juniors that are at every World Cup. No. I think everyone must be really patient about their journey, do as much as they can. And it's so tough because you'll always compare, as with feedback, compared to other people, forget about your positive traits. So I guess it's maybe some advice, and some people I'm speaking to is like, not everyone's on the same trajectory. And then that bleeds into the format, the number of people in the final. Yeah. Like, okay, broadcasting makes sense to have less people. I don't want to watch 50 people. Maybe not everyone else does either. Maybe some people do. But we've got to protect the up-and-coming riders and protect the scene. I guess we've got a lot of factory teams. Like, hey, if there's this many teams that want to have races at the race, then we kind of want to have more spots in the final. Because, like, I think the pits look better, and, you know, it's not quite F1 where there's 10 manufacturers. You know, there's all these manufacturers as well, which is kind of cool. Like, you can say, okay, but do we need 80 people in the final? Okay, maybe not in the final, fine, but there's a lot more riders on decent teams with maybe making a living than we probably think, or enough of a living, I guess.
You're completely right. And the two big things that jump out to me with what you've just said, firstly, when you talk about factory teams, not many of these factory teams have juniors in them. And that's a shame. You know, you look at some of these big teams and the juniors aren't there, and Heather Wilson's not on a big setup. She's on a Mondraker. Again, worth saying, Mondraker, you know, winning that category and the senior men's category. I don't know what the link is between the teams. Some of the others, I know that I think Sasha's, am I right in saying Sasha's on Trek? So I think she probably is one of those. But when you look at, you know, a lot of the juniors, to see that Asa is on frameworks and winning, that there's a big mix up, and it doesn't seem to be an obligation to take on a junior, male or female, and whether it should be or not is for debate. But also that reassurance, if you're an ex-professional racer, you know full well you come down and you haven't had a good result and you think it's the end of the world. You know, you're not happy to put it into a bigger context. And I try and reassure. I'm working with Gracie this year, and it's been really, it's a great opportunity for me, really, to work with someone who's got so much raw potential. I'm so excited by this opportunity. You know, you watch her ride a bike and you ride behind her on the bike and you're like, wow. You know, we were doing some filming in Portugal and they wanted to film us coming down this straight over all these jumps, and there was the riders and I was behind them because I was on the trail bike and I've been coaching on the hill. And I thought I looked, honestly, if it was me showing my mates, I'd have said, check out how good I look over these jumps. I got them perfectly smooth. I whipped it out. And then I got shown the footage, and Gracie's whipped the bike sideways, and there's me with this little turn bar, and I thought, wow, this is where we've got to. So, you know, the reason I say that is I'm really excited for someone like Gracie, and it will take her time to get used to everything and put these things together. But when you have, you know, she crashed in her semi-final and her pace was brilliant. She didn't get her qualifying quite right. There were some issues there, but we've got to talk big picture. And unfortunately, you may have to look at someone like Valley as reassurance for these others and say, look, it doesn't always go right. You've got the rainbow jersey upside down in one of the first corners, and she's going to be fuming as much as anyone. But if you say who's one of the best racers in the world, you say Valley Hole. So you can get that respect, you can get the results, you can get the support, you can get the salary. Over time, it will come. And I really hope that they can see that, because I know if you haven't had a good couple of races at the start of the season, you're probably starting to question all sorts and go, God, what's going to happen? I've really got to get a result here. But honestly, I think the people who are on the ground and see the girls ride and see the up-and-comers, they're happy to give them that time, because they do see it. It doesn't always click and immediately, you know, send you to the very top of the timesheets.
Yeah, and I think us at home and team and support, like, we remember the good stuff. We remember the potential. We remember the talent. Like, you speak to your friend nicer than you would speak to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, just, you know,
very true.
I don't know. When I look from the outside, I don't really remember the last bad race. I'm like, wow, Valley crashed pretty damn hard. It's going to hurt her mentally, probably, hopefully worse than physically, meaning I hope she's not physically damaged in the crash. Whatever. Like, to me, racing incident, I don't remember that. I remember she's a multiple World Cup winner. and all those things. And it's just so tough. Racing incident, came over the top of that brow, just sort of lost the front a little bit, really bad crash. Often her race to lose at the moment. So it's a tough position to be in, but that one, I hope she does. That one's a racing incident, pushing a little bit hard. I think that's going to happen now with these 3 runs. Like you're going up for another run. You're just subconsciously going to try find time in these places, I guess.
Yeah, and when you look at the times, I think the boys were on, it was like a low 3 minutes, like a 3:02, 3:03 or something in qualifying, and then they dropped it down to a 55 in the race. So they were finding 7 seconds more. And that, I think, is where the danger is, because if you've built up your speed to qualifying pace, you're probably going pretty hard. But then to know that you've got to go again, chip off a little bit more time in the semi, and then go again and chip off a little bit more for the final, that you really are riding that very fine line on a deteriorating track. And in terms of the girls, I've got the results in front of me, so I might just have a little quick look. So Marine was on a 36 and she dropped it to a 26. So she went 10 seconds faster from qualifying to the final. And ironically, Cami was on exactly the same time. She didn't, improve. So it's interesting to see how that speed being built up is probably what makes the difference, and how you manage that from qualifying to final.
Yeah, it's going to become a management thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you can push, and that's where I guess experience comes. And Tane, would you say maybe didn't quite judge it correctly? Like, to me, she was so attacking at the top, fast first split. I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. And maybe then she just went over the edge, and then 1 or 2 mistakes, and then they compounded, and then she was bitterly frustrated. Mistakes. Wasn't like glaring, wasn't huge, but they just compound on a 3-minute track. So that's where someone like her probably just misjudged it, just tried a little bit too hard, and that's where some of those mistakes come from, I would say. And then Cami, incredibly well ridden in the wet, and then you can see her skill and stuff like that shining through. If her time was the same in sort of wetter conditions, and then yes, not finding more time, but I think it's more speaking to how good she was in the wet. And I think not enough is spoken about Marine, and we mentioned her in the pre-show. You know that she's got 8 World Cup wins so far, and you've got to take out that time where she broke her back. That's as many as Loic Bruni has.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah,
just to put it into perspective.
Amazing.
She doesn't get enough credit, because when she's on form and healthy and is up there, like, she's going to knock on for the wins. It's not just knocking on for another podium. Like, 8 World Cup wins to her name to date is pretty impressive.
I was really impressed with her riding all weekend. She looked amazing, and I thought Tane would win it. She was carrying so much speed, and she looked fantastic on the bike as she came through these technical sections. They were the 2 riders that really jumped out. Obviously, Valley looks fantastic on a bike all the time, and Cami had this. She's got like a really conservative, efficient technique, and just sort of rides down. There's no specific flair to it, but you can just see she's carrying momentum as she rides. And Nina just sort of bullies the bike. She literally is like, I'm going to tell you where to go, and you're going to go there. So it's quite cool to see all these different techniques and different approaches and how they win out. And I think Tane will probably be frustrated, because she definitely had the speed and looked really good. It was almost like seeing the Tane of old, really. You thought, hey, here we go. She's carrying loads of speed. She looks really good on the bike. Yeah, this is great. But Marine, it's always cool. She was at the airport. We were all flying. Basically, everyone flew back on the same sort of couple of flights. And, it looked as though she just had an early night, so she was ready for her flight again. It was no big deal. And I've got a lot of respect for that, really. She sort of takes it in her stride, it seems.
Yeah, it's a big bounce back. I think, if I'm not mistaken, missed out on the podium who was in 6th in Fort William. So that's a really big bounce back, for momentum, for confidence. And you can see that some of the riders that came over here, like a Williamson, running on the confidence.
Yeah.
And you could see that pay out. And then Jess Blewett, horrific start to the season, a new team, and we know how much, speaking of potential and skill, and she's focusing on racing. She says she's not gone to hardline. She's going to focus on racing this year. Some other of the ladies did go to hardline, used it as prep, used it to build confidence, but she's obviously got a bit of trauma from getting hurt at the one in Wales. And that's pretty cool to see another lady up on the podium, new ride for her. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah, it's great. That category's an exciting category to watch, and it's becoming more and more so. So yeah, it's really nice to have a new race, a new track, a lot going on, and something that I think a lot of people would take positives out of. And clearly everyone is super motivated. There's this nice little 2-week block now we've got to sort of recover. A lot of people are staying in Europe to ride, and then it's off for probably quite a tough back-to-back couple of events with Leogang and Val di Sole. So I'm excited to be at home for a little bit, and then we've got a busy couple of weeks ahead, so we need to be prepared and ready to go for that.
Yeah, so what does that look like when you're chatting to your riders? So someone like Dunn, you've got to keep and manage the fire, and then someone like Greg is like, maybe this break couldn't have come at a better time. Like he needs to just sort of step away. And then Ronan Dunn, you're like, okay, I got to keep this fire, but I don't want him to overtrain. I want him to override on, like maybe talk to a little bit about that. Like the difference in what you would have to say to different riders and what they would do in this time off, but it's in the season.
So there's probably some interesting examples across the board here. So just picking, if we start with Greg, he's really frustrated with that bike issue in qualifying. We worked so hard to get that, what is quite a gnarly shoulder injury, into a spot where he could manage the pain, where he could deal with it, where it was stable enough for him to race. I'd say we felt as though we'd done a really good job of that to put him in that position. And the suspension isn't where he wants it. He can't push on, and he comes away, doesn't qualify. So his motivation is, right, I need to test. Get me some more shocks. Let's go testing. Let's go ride the bike. And I'm just going, whoa. Your shoulder's, torn apart. We need to give it some time to rehab. Please, can we try and manage the volume of riding and your eagerness to test? Because Greg's all about these external things and he wants this bike absolutely perfect. And so I'm trying to manage his motivation with recovery so that, and I said to him, please don't forget, if you turn up in Leogang and you've got these 2 back-to-backs, you need to feel as though the shoulder's in a good place to deal with that. And we all know how rough Val di Sole is. So you've got that side. You've got someone like Danny who's disappointed and wants again to test on the bike. And I'm concerned he'll just try and ride 110% everywhere to find that gap where maybe there's a smarter approach to go about it, a more methodical approach. Can we actually test the bike? Can I use Harry Malloy on that team, who's so switched on and I think is a real asset to Danny, but maybe they haven't built that working relationship quite yet because it's still new. Luke Meyer-Smith, I sat down on the back of the van with him after the race because he was like scratching his head a bit. He was changing wheel sizes, which I thought was quite interesting that people would do that mid-season for different tracks. And so I think he knows which direction he wants to go in now, but he's a super methodical, everything's data-driven by the numbers, wants to be straight back on it, right, get me back into it. And then you've got Charlie and Ronan, who are in Schladming with all the boys, essentially, going to have a fantastic time. And I think Charlie probably needs to not worry about what's gone wrong and just ride his bike. All of a sudden you don't lose, the rainbow stripes always weigh heavy, but they don't make you a worse bike rider. He's got no problems there and he's as fit as anything. But maybe those guys, the danger is they'll have too much fun because there'll always be a playmate. There'll always be someone to ride with, and Dakota's in that mix, and Lockie and Ollie are out there. And there's a whole crew that I probably even haven't mentioned, but I'm trying to give them a structure that isn't too rigid, but is still quite clear in what our outcomes are. This is what I think your outcome should be from this week. And I always want people to be in the gym during the weeks through the season to keep that strength so they don't get sore. They can fight the bike, they can put it where they want to, but you can't just flog them. If they're riding really intense downhill days, you can't then send them off for really intense intervals. You've got to understand, look, are you having an easy day? You're having a hard day. If you're having an easy day, this is where we can maybe bolt something in. And if you've had a hard day on the downhill bike, putting your feet up, it is not a bad thing. So a lot of people with a lot of different, we're trying to manage motivation really, aren't we? Trying not to overcook anyone coming into a 2-week block and find they're tired. And unfortunately, I'm the sort of, this voice of reason that no one wants to hear. You know, when you, like your dad says, you need to be back by 10 because we've got an early start. And you're like, oh, piss off, Dad. I'm sort of that guy sometimes, but I like to think there's reason for it.
Yeah, it's just speaking of that positive feedback email, you just might not be getting as many till a little bit later in the season when they go, oh,
this is
there was a reason. There's a reason. There was a reason for that. No, definitely. Yeah. And it made me think. I think the other challenge, especially these days, is so the result, right, is the input you get. And someone got 9th, they were expecting the podium. Someone got 15th, they're expecting a top 10. In this day and age, like you got to put that, as you said, bigger picture into perspective. And there's a lot of, say, ladies, we're losing a lot of them in the final. That can really hurt your confidence. Yep. Miriam Nicole, Gracie Hemstreet qualified in the top 10, had issues. Okay, now they're not in the final. Like that can weigh on you quite a lot emotionally, you know? And now you've missed out on another race run. Like there's all these dynamics with how much sort of, competition there is. So you got to help them with that perspective as well. And I think the ladies category is so exciting to watch. And I could list off so many notables not in the final. And I don't want to harp on that subject, like we need more. I'm just saying, like there's so many ladies that are riding incredibly well. That category is awesome. And then you've got to put it in perspective. Yeah, I wasn't in the final, but you know.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a bigger picture. Well. I just need to do my process, like you say, listen to my coach, and then come back firing at the next race.
Yeah, and Gracie's gone back to Canada, and one of the things I think would help her is more time against the clock, is her feeling as though she's got to push against the clock, and what's the clock telling me? What's that feedback? Because her natural ability on the bike is incredible. And I think from when you have a junior career that you just need to flow down the track, and you will, you know, when she was a junior, she was doing so incredibly well all the time. It's quite hard to maybe find that edge of like, what, you know, how hard do I need to push? What does it need to feel like? And it must be hard for them, because who do you ride with as an elite female? There's not that many of you. It's not a big cohort of people to go with. We've just listed everyone's going to Schladming, and I've just named loads of lads that are going to Schladming, and the girls are going there too, but the numbers are just that much more reduced. And if you've got a freight train of 5 or 6 of you, the elite woman will probably be at the back of that train, let the boys go and then ride, but she's not learning the same. You know, if you've got Colby and Charlie and Ronan and Dakota and Ollie and Lockie in a train, they're going to be giggling and learning from each other, and one's going to take one line, one's going to take the other line. There's this constant input. But if you had Gracie there and that crew, or you had Nina there and that crew, or Valley there and that crew, she's going to be sort of a bit removed from that. And who do you put them with? You almost need someone who's technically very proficient but not as fast, someone who's going to ride a little bit slower so they can keep up, a junior, but then a junior is often not as refined in their technique. It's like, there's some riders that are absolutely wild. Imagine Ricky Carmichael on a 125 trying to learn from Ricky Carmichael. You'd be like, his back wheel's left, his back wheel's right. I can't follow that. You know, you need to follow someone who's got like a nice repeatable technique. And that's something that's been going through my head as well. Like how do we give that next step? Like how do we bring on the riders and they can learn from each other? And maybe it's collaboration, you know, getting these girls together a bit more and putting them together and say, hey, let's put the competitive side apart. Everyone can learn here. We can all get better in this environment together.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Have you given it much more thought on structured skill development versus natural skill development from riding your bike, say in the group you just spoke about, versus say some structure like in other sports, there's things like drills and doing one corner over and over. And I've heard Andy Kolb does this front brake drill that him and Peckel came up with. And that's super interesting because other sports have refined skill acquisition.
Yeah.
But downhill, you get it from riding your bike a lot, and it's a very reactive sport. And some other sports are actually reactive when you play it, but you end up, say tennis, you would argue is reactive, and you're not thinking about technique when you play a match. You shouldn't be.
You're always
and
drilling
downhill,
stuff.
you definitely shouldn't be thinking, but you're doing drills and like the Aussies used to do the cuddy turns, and that's why they were so incredible in turns and balance. So have you given that much more thought on like skill acquisition on a downhill bike?
Oh,
and like how to maybe change the thinking on that?
Yeah, it really has been a big part of my sort of recent thoughts, and I've been doing a fair bit of reading up about it and trying to put it into practice, because I think it's a big gap. We're really, we're giving people a lot of structure in the gym and on their bike, and then for a lot of people, just sending them off to ride the downhill bike, go and have fun with your friends. And the attitude is often the way to get faster on a downhill bike is just to go faster. And that is a huge risk versus reward. And I don't think it has to be that way. If you look at the technical input of on a motocross track, for example, they're riding corners, they're riding off the brakes, they're standing up only, no back brake, all of these different things to try and become smooth and refine a technique. And I don't think downhillers are great at refining a technique. They're not thinking consciously about what they're doing. And I'm trying to gather more and more information to almost sell the idea of structuring things a little bit more. And one of those things is variation. There's a lot of evidence to show that variation in practice actually is a really good thing to improve skill. So if you're riding one track all day long and you're on the same line all day long, it might help you on that day, but doesn't necessarily translate to an improvement in skills development. And I wonder if there's a way that tracks, it's something that I want to talk to Afi about down in Dovey. I think there's some things that we could do on a track to offer multiple lines through the same corner and encourage that approach, so that you come into the trees and there are 4 lines, and yes, there's always going to be a faster line, but who cares? We're practicing. You don't need to take the faster line. You can take a setup line, you can take an off camber line, you can take a super tight line where you've got to, you haven't got as much grip and you've got to push that inside bar a lot more. Where are you dropping the outside pedal versus keeping the pedals parallel? All of these things that are affecting your rounded approach. So when you turn up at a track, you can reflect and go, oh, I know how to ride this. I know instinctively how to ride this because I've ridden this turn a million times. But if you've only ridden that one turn on one track, you haven't got a broad scope. It's like different terrain, like a car being driven over gravel or tarmac or whatever, or a tennis player on different surfaces. They want to build up this broad understanding. And yes, they might be better on one over another, but I do think there's huge areas to improve upon. And the days when a downhiller might say, well, you can't coach me because you're not as fast as me. You look at a weightlifting coach or a tennis coach or a football coach. Alex Ferguson wasn't the best player in the world, but he's by far the best coach that's ever coached in the game. So you can just knock that attitude into touch pretty quickly. And I think that also as the age gap gets bigger, it's almost a bit easier. If you're a young guy coming in your early 20s and you want to say, hey, I've got some real things that are going to help you here. Sometimes someone who's younger or the same age, who's already got success, might go, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to listen to that. And I think that's something they need to reflect on, because that's a weakness from the rider's point of view. Someone might be coming in with some really interesting stuff here, and they'll have to sell it. And I'm in the same position, but because my age gap maybe is now growing from some of these riders, I'm like, well, you wouldn't expect me to keep up with you. If I'm keeping up with you, I should probably be racing myself. So you can immediately sort of say, well, let's try this. I can feed back to you in a slightly different way. And there's lots to be gained. And I've had lots of ideas, and I've got lots of things that I'm looking forward to developing as the season goes on and in years to come, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. That was fascinating to hear that, because I think about it as well. These things called block practice. So if there's a glaring issue, maybe do drills and block practice, or, okay, we've noticed you're struggling with your braking, then we can work on that. And then variation is skill acquisition. So I love that. Like different corners makes total sense. You get to a race, then you might be able to gauge better if that inside line versus that outside line of a race, which one's quicker, without needing Alan there with a stopwatch.
Yeah.
Because you do, unfortunately, need to give the riders the tools and then and help them make their better decisions. And maybe they'll need you less, but then your job's done. You've done a great job.
Yeah, and you've hit on a fantastic point there. is you turn up at a bike park and there's a really good downhill track and you're there for the weekend. So you ride that same track 8 times on day 1. Then you ride the same track again day 2. You've just ridden exactly the same lines all the time. If that was your approach to practicing downhill, you then come to a new venue in Poland. You have no idea where you're going. You're not capable of adapting to different lines very well. You don't know what to do. It's a massive change. And actually, the challenge isn't going to be riding down the hill. The challenge is going to be, how do I find the best route down this hill? So you're going to teach people the best way to find the route down the hill with variation in practice. So it really is something that I think people should consider for themselves. Definitely.
Yeah, I love that. It takes me back to those weeks in Morzine. As much as it was fun, if we did vary the tracks a lot because we would get bored on the same track. We'd barely ride the same track twice on some days, and we'd sort of mix it up. I think as we start wrapping up, we can't get to all of them. If I mention Benoit, great, I'll mention him again. I think that's an awesome ride because he was on the podium, and you mentioned the 4 Frenchies on the podium. Lucas Shaw, he was in 6th, Greg Williamson, and we mentioned a lot of these riders. I think, Shane, there are some question marks, and that's where this sort of break hopefully helps him. Like someone like Laurie Greenland, I don't have all the reasons to why he's maybe a little further down the results sheet, and the same as the ladies. You know, we've got quite a few that weren't in the final, as we've mentioned. So if you think I've missed anything, maybe shout now or forever hold your peace.
No, I think we've summed it up quite well. It's been a really exciting event, something that really delivered in terms of a rider experience as well. And I think that mustn't be underestimated. I think people are generally very happy with how it went and the track that they got to ride and how it changed and how it developed. And we've got this little break now where people who've had a good result are just chomping at the bit to get to Leogang, and the others who haven't are going back, reflecting. You know, like you said with Laurie, you know, he's probably doing a bit of reflection at the moment to go, well, what do I need? You know, all the pieces are there for me. We know that. I've not suddenly changed as a rider, and I know my team and bike are fantastic, but how can I allow that to push me forward as opposed to the expectation and the pressure hold me back? So yeah, it's brilliant. We're 2 races in, and off we go to round 3 nice and soon.
Well, brilliant. And I think that's where we can give props to the organizers, props to the broadcast. Like, we had a new venue, we've been talking about going to new places, we're trying to get more races. So if Poland becomes like a regular, that's awesome. So props to them. They're obviously getting a lot of flack, and I thought the race looked good on TV, it looked fast, you know, the taping looked good, it looked professional. So we should give them credit where credit's due, obviously. So thanks to Sven Martin, because he supplied some audio that you're going to hear very soon. So don't go away. Don't stop the podcast just yet. And also check out misspentsummers.com. They've got awesome content, awesome pictures. They have an email list, which I recommend if you're a downhill fan to sign up for. And thanks so much to Alan for coming on the podcast. And I think 2 favors. We are on YouTube. So if you could pause, go to the app, subscribe to Moving the Needle. You can see my horrible face and the handsome. He says he's in his 40s. I thought he was closing on the other number, but
Easy.
I'll give him his
needles.
credit. I'm closing on my 40s.
Easy,
I won't tell you when / this year. So yeah, hit us up on YouTube, because I know people are enjoying watching, listening to it on that. And then maybe make sure you've left us a review or a rating. That would be sick. And this was your Crank Brothers race review. As we said in the beginning of the show, synonymous with downhill racing, celebrating 1 million World Champs wins last year. I'm starting to lose count, Alan. And World Cup wins, I don't even think they keep the stats. They seem to win nearly every World Cup. And I would say those conditions, varying conditions, those are the pedals you would have wanted under you. Don't you think?
I do. And if you want more information on the link with Crank Brothers and Misspent Summers, you've got to go and check out their bullet points that George writes.
Yes,
he's
the
man of Crank
manager,
Brothers.
George.
Yeah. He's the boy. He's got his finger on the pulse, and he's the man behind that. So he's if you want to realize how ingrained Crank Brothers is with downhill racing, George is there, and he knows more than most of us. And
that's a great point. It's very race rider passion-driven company, that they've got someone like that in that position who frosts to be at the races, and he's in the B zone, and he's doing the interviews himself. So check their product offering. They added shoes, as you know, and they got a lot more. So go check that out, and thanks to them, because they're always a big supporter of the podcast. I think that's it, Alan. So rider interviews are coming your way as we speak. So enjoy those.
Thanks, Andrew. Always good to chat.